Hello and welcome again to our question and answer session here, brought to you on Suza TV. You're with me again, Munir Mustafa, as we continue to answer questions which are based on biology in the O-level syllabus. Continuing with our fourth topic on the Form 1 syllabus, which is about the cell. Now, without wasting any time, let's get on with the first question. Question number 1 says, what is a cell? Now, most of the time when asked questions about the cell in Form 1, you should have a basic knowledge of what is the cell, the types of the cell, and you should have a knowledge on how to draw and label the cell. So beginning with the first question, what is a cell? You can answer a question like this in two ways. You can either say a cell is the basic unit of life. A simple answer. Or if you want a more specific answer, you can just say a cell is a basic unit of life in an organism, which is more specifically saying any organism. Any living organism is made up of cells, be it a bacteria, be it a tree, or even if it's a human being. A cell is the most basic unit. You cannot have an organism which has no cells. That organism will not be living. Moving ahead to our second part, we are told to define cell differentiation and cell specialization. These two terms are similar and yet are different. Most students confuse these two terms, thinking that they are the same thing. While in actually, to answer this question, you should just say cell differentiation refers to the way the cells are adapted in order to carry out functions efficiently. So cell differentiation is actually the way, or showing how the cells are adapted to its work. So by saying cell differentiation, you really just mean saying that the adaptations of the cells, I mean looking at white blood cells, how they are adapted. Looking at how they are adapted, you could say that's their differentiation. While cell specialization refers to the process whereby cells are evolved into having specific functions. So the process whereby cells are being evolved daily, that is cell specialization. While cell differentiation means how they are adapted, cell specialization refers to the evolution of the cells. For example, in cell specialization, you can see the sperm cells of how they are evolved, how their heads are evolved, how the tails are evolved, how red blood cells are evolved. That is cell specialization. But cell differentiation actually means to the adaptations, or how they are adapted to carry out their functions. Moving on to our second question, we have to differentiate between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. As it's a common knowledge, it's a topic in which in cells a person should know the difference between the two types of cells, which are prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. While answering a question like this, you can either draw a table like this shown on the screen, or you could write one difference and writing the word while, then writing the other part. So if you're answering in a table method, you should just do it like this. For instance, looking at on the eukaryotic cells, they are generally larger. So one characteristic of a eukaryotic cell is it's larger than prokaryotic cells. So while differentiating things, you should write two characteristics which go on the same page. For instance, you could write how the size of the eukaryotic cells and prokaryotic cells. but you cannot compare the size to the function. By doing that, you're making a mistake, and most students do the same mistake like this. So eukaryotic cells are generally larger than prokaryotic cells, as prokaryotic cells are smaller. For instance, bacteria cells are prokaryotic cells, while red blood cells in humans and other animals are eukaryotic cells. Another difference is that while eukaryotic cells have membrane-bound organelles such as mitochondria and so on, prokaryotic cells do not have membrane-bound organelles. So that's the difference. You can find mitochondria and other membrane-bound organelles in eukaryotic cells, but you cannot find them in prokaryotic cells. And then prokaryotic cells have a membrane-bound nucleus. This is the most distinguishing fact between prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells, as the word eukaryotic means membrane-bound nucleus, while prokaryotic cells do not have membrane-bound nucleus. Actually, their nuclei is just a circular strand. That is what a prokaryotic cell is. Another one is that they are more complex than prokaryotic cells. Eukaryotic cells are more complex as they have different organelles which perform various functions, such as the nuclei, which provide genetic material, the mitochondria, which provide energy to the cells, the cytoplasm, which is a site of some chemical reactions, lysosomes, and so on and so forth. But prokaryotic cells lack those organelles, lack the complexity, so they are less complex. Most eukaryotic cells do not have flagella, and if people are asking what are flagella, a flagella is just a whip-like structure which helps a cell in locomotion. It's found mostly in bacteria and some other prokaryotic cells. So in prokaryotic cells, they have flagella for locomotion, while in eukaryotic, they do not have flagella. Looking at this, we can see a few differences between them, but in reality, a student can write more than 5. 5 is just an agreed number, the minimum. Most of the time, students are required to write 5 differences, but you can write even up to 10, 20, whatever the number is, and the time. It depends on the time in which you can answer it. Now moving ahead to our third question. To draw a well-labeled plant cell and show the functions of some parts. Well, a question like this is quite straightforward. You are required to draw the plant cell which is well labeled and then show which parts are required and then show the functions of the required parts, because in a question like this, most people look at it in one way, just drawing and labeling it, but actually it has two meanings. It has two parts. The first part, you should draw the cell. The second part is to write the functions of whichever mentioned parts are in the question. So answering a question like this, you can simply answer it just like by drawing something like this. You can see that there's a diagram here which shows the plant cell. A plant cell is usually drawn like this. And the difference between a plant cell and an animal cell is that the animal cell does not have a central vacuole, it does not have chloroplasts, and it does not have cell walls. So these three things are very important in drawing a plant cell. While drawing an animal cell, you are required not to draw any cell wall, do not draw a chloroplast, and do not draw a central vacuole. Those three things are exclusively for a plant cell. So you can draw it like this and you can label it. by showing the most important parts to be shown are in a plant cell. You should show the cell wall, which surrounds the plant cell. You should show the central vacuole, and you should show the chloroplast. These three things differentiate a plant cell with a normal cell, with an animal cell. So as we have seen that this is how you should draw a plant cell. A plant cell looks like this. Moving ahead to the parts required, we are told to mention the function of these required parts. The first part, we have already seen how to draw a cell wall. In the second part, there is the cell wall itself. We are told to mention the function of a cell wall. While answering a question like this, you should know, what does the cell wall do? You should actually, a student, while answering a question based on functions, you should know what is the part and what function does it do. In answering a function like this, you can just say the main function of a cell wall is to provide protection and support to the plant, to the cell. The cell wall actually provides protection, as it does not allow many things to go in and go out in the cell membrane. So it acts as a barrier, and also it supports the plant cell, giving it its shape. As we all know, an animal cell is irregular in shape, but a plant cell has its regular shape, as seen before. But what gives it its shape? It's the cell wall. The cell wall, which is made up of cellulose, which is a tough carbohydrate. But about the tough carbohydrate, its main function is to keep it in place, is to give it its shape. That's the main function of a cell wall. Also, the cell sap vacuole. What is a cell sap vacuole? A cell sap vacuole is the central vacuole which is seen on the plant cell. So its main function is to help the cell retain its shape. How do we ask, or how does the cell sap vacuole help the cell to retain its shape? Well, as we all know, the cell wall itself provides pressure. The pressure which is forced inwards. So the cell sap vacuole mainly exerts pressure outwards to counter the pressure which is exerted inwards by the cell wall. So the cell sap vacuole's pressure, every time it exerts its pressure, it helps to keep the cell in shape and help it not to be broken down by the cell wall. As the pressure by the cell wall, if left, it would destroy the cell. Also, we have the chloroplast. A chloroplast is also the main organelle which differentiates a plant cell from an animal cell. Its main function is to absorb sunlight during photosynthesis, whereby we know that green plants make their own food from sunlight due to having chloroplast. Chloroplasts have the green pigment chlorophyll, which absorbs the sunlight. So by absorbing the sunlight, it helps the plant to create food. So that is the main function of a chloroplast in the plant cell. Moving on to our fourth question, we are asked, what features are present in plant cells but are absent in animal cells? When asked a question like this, the main thing which is needed, the main concept which is needed, is that the student should know that what is required here is nothing but differences. The student should differentiate between an animal cell and a plant cell. How should you show the differentiation? You can show it by the tabular method, in which you differentiate. You show the animal cell and a plant cell or you can just mention the differences. For instance, like this, you should show which features are present in plant cells but are absent in animal cells. The main answer, you could just write the cell wall, the chloroplast, the large permanent vacuole, and the tonoplast membrane. All three things we have mentioned before, but the tonoplast membrane is the membrane which surrounds the vacuole, therefore helping it exert more pressure and acts as a barrier to the vacuole so it does not burst. That is a tonoplast membrane, which we can see in the previous. We can see in the previous. You can see that in the previous drawing that this is the tonoplast, which is the membrane surrounding the vacuole. That is what a tonoplast is. Now, moving ahead to our fifth question. Our fifth and final question is that what functions do these parts have in a cell? We are asked that inside the cell, we know that there are many organelles, but we are asked to show what functions do they have. So, by saying what functions do they have, for instance, we have the nucleus, the mitochondria, the cell vacuole, the cell membrane, and lysosomes. We are asked to mention their functions. You can mention it by taking one word and showing its functions, or by using a tabular method just like this. So beginning, we have the nucleus. We are asked, what job does a nucleus have in a cell? It can either be a plant cell, it can either be an animal cell. Here, it does not matter which type of cell you are asked. What matters is saying the function of the cell. So, the function of the nucleus is first to determine the chemical processes. How does the nucleus determine chemical processes which take place in the cell? That is due to the fact that it has DNA. DNA, which is the short form for deoxyribose nucleic acid. Deoxyribonucleic acid. The DNA has many functions. One of those functions is to determine chemical processes which take place in the cell. That is one of the functions of DNA, which we will learn as we go ahead in other sessions. Another one is to control the functions of all parts of the cell. As we should know that the nucleus is the master, or we should say the nucleus is the master organelle of the cell, in which if a cell does not have a nucleus, it has a short life and very short function. For instance, the red blood cell lacks a nucleus, lives for only 120 days, in which it lacks a nucleus because it needs much space to store oxygen in the hemoglobin. That is why the red blood cell has no nucleus and has a short life. So if the nucleus's main function is to control all functions of the cell. Another one is to determine the cell's size, shape, and function. That is saying its specialization also depends on the nucleus. The cell's specialization depends on its nucleus. So the fact that the nucleus's main function is to determine its size, its shape, and its functions. So we know that cancer cells are abnormal cells, in which the nucleus does not work properly. It can be either due to genetically hereditary diseases or cancer-causing agents, which is something for our later sessions. Also, to determine the hereditary characteristics of the cell. This is due to the fact that there are chromosomes in the nucleus. Due to the fact that there are chromosomes in the nucleus which in which they undergo meiosis and mitosis. It determines the hereditary characteristics of a cell. So whilst a cell divides, its hereditary materials from the DNA, from the chromosomes, are determined through the nucleus. Also, we have the mitochondria. The mitochondria is one of the most famous, after the nucleus, is one of the most famous organelles which are known inside the cell. So the main function of a nucleus, we know that it's the powerhouse of the cell. By saying that it's a powerhouse of the cell, we just mean that all energy producing processes such as respiration take place in the mitochondria. The mitochondria has smooth places and has indentations. These indentations are called the cristae. As in the cristae, the respiration takes place, and we all know that respiration requires or produces energy. So as it produces energy, we can say that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, as energy is produced from the mitochondria. We have the cell vacuole. The cell vacuole, we can say this in form of the animal cell or plant cell. In animal cells, the main function of cell vacuoles is to secrete and excrete wastes. So all waste products from the cell are excreted and secreted from vacuoles. In plant cells, it provides pressure to support the cell, as we have seen in the cell sap vacuoles function. The cell membrane's main function is to act as a barrier, to allow some substances to enter and to disallow other substances to enter or leave. So a cell membrane's main function is to just be a barrier, as the cell membrane is made up of proteins and fats. This causes it to be a very effective barrier, a semi-permeable membrane-like substance. Also, we have the lysosome. A lysosome is nothing but a circular organelle inside the cell. This organelle has a function in which it is used to digest certain materials within the cell. These cells can be digested materials or pathogens or other things. And also they are used to destroy bacteria and worn out cells. All bacteria and all worn out cells are destroyed inside the lysosome. The lysosomes contain enzymes which work by destroying worn out cells and destroying bacteria. Also, lysosomes have a function and are called suicide bags. Why are lysosomes called suicide bags? Because they have a function which is called autolysis, which means self-breakdown. As a self-breakdown means that when the cell reaches a certain period, the lysosome's membranes burst, releasing the enzymes into the cell, whereby the cell is digested by the lysosome enzymes. I'd like to continue with answering questions by asking questions, looking at questions found in the exams and answering them. But let us stop here for today. I hope that you enjoyed this session. Join us for the next session as we continue to tackle questions tackles questions found in biology in the O-level syllabus. Thank you, and let's meet again.